TorahCafe.com.
So here's a confession. It's always good to start off with a confession because that gets everybody's attention. They want to hear what you want to confess. I get the email about the retreat, and my initial reaction is, it's been 5 years. This would be a 6th. Maybe I'll just give it a miss this year. And then, as time moves on, a certain health issue emerges, surgery must follow. I have every reason to give this year a miss. But it's 10 years of the retreat, and it's, after all, the right thing to do. And I wonder to myself, should I, shouldn't I? And then reality dawns, that sometimes you have to do what you have to do, regardless of how you feel about it, because deep down, you still know that it is the right thing to do. And that applies in the context of personal relationships, of our friendships, of our life goals, and of course, of our spiritual aspirations. The two most uttered words on the lips of all of mankind that encapsulates the apathy that so erodes our lives is, I am not in the mood, or I can't be bothered. Somebody was once asked, what's the difference between ignorance and apathy? And he said, I don't know, and I don't care. The problem is that when you're no longer in the mood, then you're no longer going to be bothered, and then the end result of that is that you stop investing the time and the energy and the heart and the soul, and frankly, we all know where that actually leads to. Again, in any sphere, in any dimension of our reality. My grandfather, Olav Shalom, used to say, before marriage, he'll walk to the other end of the world for you. After marriage, he won't even go to the local grocery shop. Plain and simply put, before marriage, he's interested in attracting you, so he wants to make a big impression, and so he's going to put in the effort, and he'll do whatever it needs to be done. And after marriage, well, apathy sets in. She's not in the mood, or he can't be bothered, and you get to a stage where, well, I've anyway hooked my fish, so I no longer need to apply the same effort. Let me tell you a little story, a true story about a member of mine called Lawrence. Lawrence, a member of my shul, runs a menswear shop in the city of London. It is, in fact, not a particularly big shop, but he has seen tremendous success out of it. This is a man, we heard last night in the keynote at dinner, who has a lot of muzzle. Now, this is how it happened. Many years ago, there was a big fire in King's Cross train station, one of the biggest underground train stations in London. And as a result, they determined that they needed to create new exits, emergency exits. And one of them would have effectively opened directly into where Lawrence's shop is. So they served him with a forced possession order, where they could effectively force him to sell his shop to them in order to build this emergency exit. And so, fair enough, you don't have a choice. And he had a closing down sale. Everybody loves a closing down sale. When a shop is closing down, it means that even though the price has been marked down from a 400% markup to 350% markup, in your mind, you're still getting a metzia. So they sent him that enforced order. And they're intending to go and build this exit. But turns out they decided they weren't going to make the exit there. They were going to end up making the exit elsewhere. But they kept that order in place just in case. And God bless the British. For 18 years, Lawrence had a closing down sale. Several years ago, when the sale finally ended because some bureaucrat somewhere realized the clerical error, Lawrence came to me on a Shabbos at the Kiddush, and he said, Rabbi, I want to branch out. I want to open up now another huge shop at the very bottom floor of the Merrill Lynch building. The lease is going to cost me a fortune. I want your blessing. So I gave him a blessing, and I told him he has to ensure to keep the shop closed on Shabbos. He agreed. We shook hands. A l'chaim was said, and business continues to boom. He opened another shop around the corner for women's suits, which closed after 6 months. He came to me, Shabbos, Rabbi, What happened? I said, Lawrence, you didn't come to me for a bracha for that one. But that's by the by. Lawrence is also something of a gambler. And so a couple of years ago, he bought himself a horse, which he decided to call Menorah. He came to me yet again on a Shabbos for a blessing. And I told him, same terms, no Shabbos gambling. Only this time I also got smarter, and I said to him that 10% of his winnings he has to give to a charity of my choice. We shook. We said, L'chaim. 2 months later, he calls me up. Where are you? I'm at home. Are you near a computer? Yes. Go put it on right now. Type in this web address. I'm staying on the phone with you. That's okay. All right, Rabbi, what do you see? I said, Lawrence, I see a racing track. There's a website. Watch the race, Rabbi. It's a rerun. I did. Menorah is in the race. His odds are 40-1, which every pound, in that case, or dollar you bet, you'll get 40. That just reflects how weak of a horse he is. Menorah is trailing so far behind. The odds make perfect sense. Menorah is suddenly somewhere in the middle now. Even the presenter becomes ecstatic as he announces that Menorah is now in second place. And as they're coming in on that last lap, Menorah is out in front. And at the end of the race, Menorah wins by a whisker, to my utter dismay. And I can't believe it. And there's only one thought going through my mind. I know Lawrence is a gambler. The minimum he will have bet is 1,000 pounds. 40 grand, that's $4 for a charity of my choice. Rabbi, guess how much I bet? I hold my breath. Go on, Lawrence. Tell me. Nothing. It was Shabbos. And I'm like, what? I mean, oh, good for you. You see, Lawrence did what he needed to do because he knew it was the right thing to do. He could have said, deal shmiel, Shabbos ahin, Shabbos aher, I'm going to make money. But he didn't. He kept to the terms of the deal, much as he might have otherwise not wanted to be bothered to do so. That horse, it went on to make him plenty of money. It had a baby now worth more than the actual mother. But the hard fact is that when you do what you know is the right thing to do, even as you may otherwise not want to, it will all work out for your benefit. In classic Jewish terms, this is what we refer to as Kabbalas Ol, accepting to do something regardless of where your emotions feature in the equation. In fact, the term Kabbalas Ol literally translated means accepting the yoke. A yoke is something that you use to steer an animal, where the animal might want to go in one direction, but you want to steer it in a different direction. Your own animalistic self may not want to be bothered doing the right thing, if anything at all. But your innate sense of spirituality, your spiritual self, harnesses itself to the animal and steers it in the right direction. Our forefathers are famously referred to as the wheels on God's chariot. They may not have had animalistic inclinations, maybe therefore we don't typically ascribe to them the term Kabbalas Ol in that sense in the same way. But the principle is the same. Like a chariot which is utterly subservient to its master to go wherever the driver wants to lead, they were equally subservient to the will of the Almighty. How do you aspire to such a level? Well, hey, it's high ground. But how can you work towards getting there? The answer, first and foremost, is plain and simply to take your ego out of the equation. The can't be bothered is prefaced with the I. I can't be bothered. I am not in the mood. But with a little bit of more humility, with some element of self-abnegation, you will do it regardless of how you feel about it. You know, when we were proclaimed as God's chosen nation, as the Jewish people, it was on account of two words, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. The starting point, in the first instance, is committing to doing, even before it has meaning for you, even before it appeals to your own sensibility. And thus to state, as some do, that I will not fulfill until I better understand and enhance my appreciation and the deeper meaning behind whatever, well, that's just servicing the self, which is essentially a denial not only of divine authority and of Torah, but of the most fundamental premise of any religion in general. Because religion, by definition, is all about what can I do for God, not what can God do for me. It's all about Kabbalah soul. It's about the naaseh, I will do before the nishma. Let's take one example of many. There is a mitzvah to give tzedakah, to give charity. Not just any amount, but the Torah itself says a minimum of 10% of your earnings. To some, that might sound a little insane. I just closed a deal. I just earned myself $100,000, and you're telling me I have to give away $10,000 to charity? I earn $200,000 a year. I have to give away $20,000 to charity? It makes no sense. $3,000 maybe. If I'm feeling generous, maybe $6,000, $7,000. But to give away 10% of that which I labored so hard for defies logic. It's unacceptable. You know, God famously addresses that one in Malachi when he says, Ubechanuni nabazos, test me. Test me. You wonder how you can live like that? Test me and see if I won't repay you in abundance. Varikosi lachem bracha ad belidai. I will bestow blessing upon you until it'll be more than enough. And as the rabbis add, until your lips even get tired from saying enough. In this particular instance, God spells out the benefit. He tells you the implicit reward if you transcend the I and submit to doing the right thing. He spells out the payback. If you have sufficient guts and faith to take his word for it, why should you accept the otherwise seemingly unacceptable? In other words, in most other instances, you won't necessarily know of the reward. It's not necessarily spelled out. But be assured that inasmuch as you might consider something unacceptable, there is always inherent benefit to you, in ways that you cannot imagine, just as in the way that God spells it out in the context of charity. Undoubted advantage, invariable reward, not just to you, but indeed to the world at large, for doing what you need to do, even if you don't get it right now, for accepting what you might otherwise deem to be the unacceptable. Now, to be sure, and it should be stressed, I'm not advocating that we should be programmed robots. Judaism is not a cult where you simply are expected to follow blindly, and ours is not to ask why. Certainly not. The Nishma, the declaration at Sinai of we will listen, implying the deeper understanding, that's also critical. That's also vital and necessary. What's that story they tell about this elderly Jewish man, Moshe Weiss, who's emigrating from Poland to the United States, and his friend, his lawyer, sits down with him and says, look, you don't speak any English. It's simple. They're going to ask you 5 questions. Just answer them in order and you'll be good. First question, what's your name? You tell them Moshe Weiss. Second question, they'll ask you how many children you have. You say 5. Third question, who's the first president of the United States? You say George Washington. Next question, they're going to ask you how many states are there. You say 50. And then they might ask you if you also have your parents. If they do, you say Baruch Hashem Beida, thank God both. Moshe Weiss crosses over into the United States. The immigration officer takes him to the side and says, okay, just a couple of questions. Question number 1, who was the first president of the United States? He says, Moshe Weiss. How many states are there? He says, 5. He says, right, what's your name? He says, George Washington. And how many children do you have? 50. At which point the immigration officer, who also happened to be Jewish, realizes what's going on over here, leans over, and in Yiddish says to him, Zog mir Moshe, tell me, Moshe, wer is mer meshuga, mich zu dir? Who's crazier, you or me? And he says, Baruch Hashem Beida, thank God both. The lesson is simple. You can master the lines. You can master the technique. But if you don't internalize, then yes, you will get stuck. That is the challenge. You do have to internalize as well. You have to seek. You have to explore. You have to enhance and develop your understanding. That is, after all, what Hasidism sought to introduce. Hasidism looks to enable us, within the religious sphere, to be able to better enhance and appreciate all that we're doing. We have to explore and discover the inherent beauty of our faith so that we can pursue our responsibilities, not just as categorical imperatives of formal morality and obedience, but ultimately, yes, with a passion, with a deeper appreciation, with an internalization so that we can allow for it to transform our very essence. But again, that exploration must never be a prerequisite to actual fulfillment. You cannot say, first, I want to get it, then I'll do it. No. Do it, you do it. And then, whilst you're doing it, understand the better significance of your actions. Naaseh and then v'nishma. Every single one of us here will have complied with our parents' edicts as children on account of 4 words. What were they? Because I said so. Where's the justice in that? It made no sense to our infantile minds. In fact, everything about it will have defied our childish sense of logic. But nevertheless, it was almost always enough to get us to do what we had to do. Mark Twain famously said, when I was 17 years old, my father was so stupid and ignorant I couldn't stand to have the old man around. When I was 21, I was amazed as to how much the old man had learned in just 4 years. And interestingly enough, my father, Olav Shalom, used to quote that to me often, and now it hangs as a poster in my own office. What that suggests, plain and simply, is that as children, we lack a certain intellectual and emotional maturity. And as we get older, maybe we start to get it a little bit more. We learn to appreciate the rationale of mom and dad's decisions, albeit when younger, it was simply because I said so. And so, too, in regard to your relationship with the divine and our spiritual responsibilities. We might not always get it. In fact, most often we don't get it. But why treat your supreme parent any different to the way you treated your mortal ones? Your soul certainly gets it. So let it harness itself to your natural inclinations and steer you in the right direction. Have you ever wondered where we got the number 613 from? We talk about 613 commandments. We always espouse this number, but what is its origins? You find famously many different codifiers, Nachmanides, Maimonides, they argue about what is it and isn't a positive or negative commandment, but on balance they still come down to the same conclusion of 613, whatever their differences might be. At the beginning of time, there were only 7 universal laws. Our forefathers observed more of their own through their own prophetic awareness and vision. But 613 is actually based on a verse that we're all familiar with, taught already from early childhood. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe commanded us the Torah. Did he? Last I checked, it was God who commanded us the Torah. But we famously know that God uttered the first 2 of the 10 commandments, which all of the Jewish people collectively heard, knowing, therefore, as a result, through that public revelation, that it was all true. The first command, I am the Lord your God, encapsulates all of the positive commandments. And then, thou shalt not have any other gods, encapsulates all of the negative. Thereafter, Moshe, at the behest of the Jewish people, communicated the rest to them. Torah, if you add up the numerical value of the word Torah, it makes up 611. Yes, 611 commandments Moshe communicated to us. The other 2 we got from God, and that's how we get to the number 613. Of course, that begs one simple question. Why? Why do we have to have all these commandments? You know, it's the ancient Jewish joke of Rabbi Greenberg, who goes up to heaven and says, Dear God, is it true that we are the chosen people? And God says, yes, Rabbi Greenberg, it's true, you are the chosen people. God, can I ask you for a favor? Sure. Would you mind choosing somebody else for a change? Why do we have all these commandments? Comes along the famous Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha and tells us in a famous Mishnah, Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakos es Yisrael, God wanted to bestow great merit on the Jewish people. Lefichach, therefore, he gave them a plethora of Torah and mitzvahs to fulfill. Plain and simply put, we have all these things we have to do because it provides us with so many opportunities in every sphere of life to do the divine will. And that's great. There's only one real problem, because it also provides us with so much opportunity to really mess up as well. I'd rather narrow it down to a dozen or so at least if I get 6 right, I'm at 50%. But 6 out of 613 is less than 1%. So frankly, you're not really doing me any favors. And the explanation, however, is this. Our sages tell us that were we to fulfill a mitzvah, to do what God wants us to do, without any subjectivity, without any agenda whatsoever, even one solitary mitzvah, holy, pure, altruistic, for no reason other than because I said so, then we're guaranteed a place in paradise. The problem is that we invariably do what we do always with some element of ulterior motive. Whether it's because it makes us feel good, or because we connect with it, or because it speaks to me and what have you. And we're all guilty of this on some level. I love Coca-Cola. I love vanilla ice cream. I love you. Well, not you, but yeah. I love Coca-Cola because I love the way it quenches my thirst. I love vanilla ice cream because I love the way it tickles my palate. I love you because I love the way I feel when you are around me. Is that genuine love? Not necessarily. You love the other person because it makes you feel good. And therefore, what you're really looking to do is nurture yourself. And the problem is, when you get tired with Coke, you switch to Pepsi. When you get fed up with vanilla ice cream, yes, it still tastes good, but now I've had so much of it, I'd like to move on to chocolate fudge. The attraction wears out sooner or later because we're still searching to fulfill our own needs. I love this mitzvah because it appeals, because it speaks to me, because I feel good when I do it. Again, you're nurturing the self, the ego, even if it's in a spiritual context. Yes, you're fulfilling the mitzvah, but it's not without ulterior motive. In the spiritual realm, if it's left up to our personal whims, to what appeals to us, to what makes sense, to what feels good, then we leave ourselves open at some point maybe to challenging or to questioning, and at some point maybe it no longer makes sense to me or it no longer makes me feel good, and then we risk abandoning it. And so what Rabbi Hanania is telling us is that in as much as we might inevitably fall prey to this attitude, and we always tend to have some element of subjectivity in our fulfillment, when there are so many mitzvot, when it's just a dozen, but indeed 613, then there is every likelihood that there will be at least one of them which will be fulfilled altruistically without motive, simply because I said so. And that, in turn, is your ticket to heaven. There's a shop in Bondi Beach, New South Wales in Australia. It's called Krinsky's. It's the only kosher shop there, and you get a very unique mix of swimwear-clad people and Hasidim wandering in. They don't typically blend well together, but within this kosher shop, they both venture in. And one rabbi I know told me he observed this exactly as it happened. He watched swimwear mom walking into the shop with her child in tow, and they have the shopping carts very conveniently next to the, I was going to say sweets, but you wouldn't know what that means, next to the candies and the chocolates on the left-hand side. And the child reaches for a sweet, a candy, and says, "Mom, can I have this?" And Mom says, "No." And the child starts to throw a tantrum, and the mother is, as many mothers will be able to relate to, wheeling her shopping cart through the aisles, schlepping this screaming child in tow. A few moments later, in walks Hasidic mom with her child in tow. The child looks to Mom and says, "Mom, can I have this sweet?" Now, to be sure, they're all kosher, but not all of them necessarily have the actual hechsher, the label on the actual packet. So Mom says to him, "No, it's not kosher." And the child readily accepts. And so you've got this one mom still going through the aisles with the screaming child, and the other mom walking with her obedient child through. In walks a Lubavitcher Chassid. Now, children are eminently brilliant. They've got this unbelievable in-tune radar. And this child, Hasidic mom's child, observes how this Lubavitcher Chassid reaches for a higher shelf, where there are some chocolates or what have you, and takes it. He leaves his mother's hand. He goes running down, zooms, reaches up for that chocolate, checks it out, sure enough, goes back to his mother and says, "Mom, can I have this? It's kosher." And Mom says, "No." And this child now starts to scream and wail, and all of a sudden you've got two moms with screaming children through the aisles. The question is this: what changed within that child? Why does he accept the no, it's not kosher, but goes nuts at the mere no itself? The point is that both children are raised knowing that you could negotiate a no. What this one child, however, knows is that you can never negotiate a mitzvah. It's not as if his mother ever said to him, "If you behave, I'll let you have a little non-kosher later on." The kashrut was an absolute. Even 3-year-old children understand the restrictions of the absolute. Because when parents convey that restriction, they exude confidence. The child knows and senses that when mom and dad say no to certain restrictions or values in regard to Shabbat or kosher, and they do so with an absolute conviction, no less than when they would tell their child not to run into the road, he senses that. And the child also knows and senses how a parent may not exude that same confidence when it comes to the yes or no's of other values, and that therefore becomes eminently negotiable with them. When you waver in your communication to your kid because it's not an absolute by you, then don't be surprised if it wavers later on within them as well. Unless we have conviction, our children will not have the assurance necessary to be able to differentiate between good and bad, between what is appropriately acceptable and what is not. And the point is one and the same. We are all kids in the spiritual sense. We don't always get it, but we have to condition ourselves to sometimes reach beyond our comfort zones, to have some absolutes in our lives. It doesn't, again, mean that we are programmed robots any more than a child who's responding to their parents' behest. It just means that your job in this global conglomerate is not to always get what the boss wants, but to do your job because you are an integral cog in the machine that makes the whole business work. And that's why Judaism in general and Hasidism in particular puts so much emphasis, in fact, on the importance of simcha, of joy. Joy, by definition, doesn't necessarily mean having to jump up and down and start dancing at every given opportunity, although it would be great if you can get to that level. Joy, first and foremost, is a state of mind. It means accepting your reality with a willingness and a certain gladness of a heart. To accept whatever the situation, whether in fact you get it or not. To be able to figure out how you can accept the unacceptable. You don't know why your role in your cubicle is of significance in the bigger scheme of production. But simply knowing that it is, and that your boss appreciates your efforts in and of itself should surely make you feel happy about what you're doing. Which is why, incidentally, on Shavuos, when we celebrate the very giving of the Torah, Hasidim always traditionally greet each other with Kabbalah Torah, may you once again renew your acceptance of the Torah, besimcha ubepnimius. Accept it with happiness and internally. The prerequisite is the joy, accepting happily. Nasa, you do. Then, what is to follow over the course is also internally, the enhanced understanding of which will, of course, increase joy as well, the nishma. You know, rabbis get all different kinds of questions of all different sorts. Some are probing, some are interesting, and there's always the one or two that can be exceptionally annoying or agitating, like, Rabbi, I don't know, my cow fell into my chicken soup, what do I do? And it's then that a rabbi's limitless patience is called upon to deal with the question calmly and collectively, giving that challenging individual as much attention as you would anyone else. That's what rabbis are expected to do. So how do we explain the reaction of the famous sage, Shamai, who when confronted with a man asking him to teach the whole Torah while standing on one foot, proceeded to chase him away with a stick? Imagine, if you will, someone coming to your door and asking for a donation. I'm sure many will have been through the experience. You give them $5, and they turn around and they say, is that it? Can't you do more? And then, okay, so you choose to up it to 25, and he stands there and he says, is that it? Can't you do more? And at which point, you either ask him to go away or you politely close the door in his face or whatever it is. One thing I'm sure nobody has ever done is you don't start taking a stick and chasing him down the road. And if you do, anger management. Shammai, what's going on over here? How do we understand that? Of course, we know that thereafter the same man went to the great sage Hillel, who in turn taught him the famous golden rule. Don't do unto others what you would not have done unto yourself, which is the very principle of love your fellow as yourself. So what's really happening in this story? The answer, observes the Rebbe, lies in a tiny detail referenced within the story when the Talmud makes a deliberate point of telling us that it wasn't just a stick, but it was a builder's measuring tool. Who cares? Who cares if it was a builder's measuring tool or was a baseball bat? That doesn't change the reality. And yet the point is this. Shammai wasn't chasing the man away. He was actually also looking to teach the man a very important lesson in life. If you want to embrace the faith, then the first thing you have to do is learn to accept the no's before you can embrace the yes. In other words, when you embrace the yes, I will go to the gym 3 times a week, but you don't embrace the no. No, don't tell me what to eat. I'll have pizza for dinner every single night, followed by ice cream for dessert and eaten whatever. Then over the course of time, not only will the gym not have its desired effect, but you'll give up going to the gym altogether. That's what Shammai is teaching the man. By taking the builder's measuring stick, he's declaring if you want to build a meaningful and spiritual existence, then the starting point is to chase away the negatives before you look to embrace the positives. The yeses of life can be appealing, but the no's, we all struggle with those. But Judaism is not a pick-a-mix. The starting point is Kabbalas Ol, accepting and embracing the no's, whether they appeal or not, whether they make sense to you or not. And then, thereafter, he goes to Hillel to learn about the yeses and the positives as well. The Jews of yesteryear wandered listlessly into the desert after they left Egypt. And one of their first stops was in a place called Marah. Bitter, so called because the waters there tasted bitter. And in response, they complained bitterly to Moshe, and God thereafter sweetened the waters for them and quenched the thirst of the Jewish people. And immediately following that episode, we're told, Sham Samla Choka Mishpat. Immediately thereafter, God gave the Jewish people then and there, even still before Sinai, certain mitzvot, a statute and an ordinance. What is a statute? A supra-rational principle. In this instance, it was the mitzvah, the inexplicable law of the red heifer. The ordinance was the law of Shabbos. Analyzing this psychologically, what is apparent is that the Jewish people, a newborn nation, struggling with this newfangled experience, wandering aimlessly in a expanse of desert, they're worn, they're lethargic. You might even say they were suffering from post-traumatic stress after 2 centuries of enduring so much servitude and hardship in Egypt. They're relieved that they're freed, but all of this is taking its natural toll. And sometimes a negative disposition can overwhelm a person to a point where it impacts every dimension of the person's existence. You can become so overcome with bitterness such that it can permeate your psyche. And yes, even the physical senses, such that the waters tasted bitter. And God's immediate response after sweetening the waters is introducing them to a statute. The ultimate statute, the red heifer, a law that makes no sense on the human level anyway. God is effectively instructing them that sometimes in life you're not going to get it. At this juncture, the pain and the turmoil of the past 2 centuries are going to start to kick in. Questions are invariably going to be asked. There's going to be a feeling of bitterness. Why did I have to endure such turmoil? Why was there so much devastation? Why are we now wandering aimlessly? What is the point of it all? What this law at this juncture is being introduced and hoping to achieve, in effect, is that God is saying, embrace the statute. Learn to understand that not all is given to understand. Learn to accept the unacceptable. And indeed, right after that stop of Marah, the Torah tells us they came to another place called Elima, and adds a curious, trivial detail. There were 70 date trees and 12 wells of water. And you've got to wonder, 70 date trees, 12 wells of water for 2.5 million people, it's not a whole lot. Yet, when you learn to embrace the balance in your life, when you know that not everything is given to you to understand, when you could learn to park that sense of self a little and accept the unacceptable, then you will start to feel that aforementioned simcha, joy in your life. And then, yes, even 12 wells of water, 70 date trees, even the small stuff starts to loom large as you will appreciate the blessings in everything. And that brings us immediately to the other dimension of this approach. Let's move beyond just observance and consider life events. There are all kinds of experiences that we endure in the journey of life, not least the very threat to man's own mortality. And we find ourselves challenged and wondering and asking. One famous biblical story, of course, is the tragic, untimely passing of Aaron's 2 sons. And his response, says the Torah, was Vayidom Aaron. Aaron remained silent. He was undeniably pained by the ineffable experience. But somehow he was able to reach into the deep reservoirs of his faith and manage to muster the strength to accept his fate, knowing that there is a divine plan, albeit beyond human comprehension. Curiously, right after that story, we're introduced in that same portion to the laws of kosher in the Torah. And the Torah tells us that these laws were communicated not just to Moses and Aaron, like all the other laws, but also to Aaron's remaining 2 sons. They were also introduced, and God communicated this law, these mitzvot of kosher, to them as well. Why? So Rashi, the commentator par excellence, explains, because they joined their father in maintaining a dignified silence when confronting the passing of their brothers, they were rewarded that God speak to them directly as well in this one instance when teaching the laws of kosher. And there Rashi stops short in explaining why in specific this law of kosher over any other. I suggest to you plain and simply this. Kosher is also a statute. Why can't I mix milk and meat? Why is a cow okay but not a horse? Eating is something that we do on a daily, constant basis. It's something that we essentially take for granted. And yet, all of the time, we are adhering to something that makes no sense to us. And yet, we still intuitively, instinctively do it because God said so. You'll stand there at 11 o'clock at night in Kennedy or Heathrow or O'Hare Airport, and you didn't listen to your wife or your mother and bring with you a kosher snack. And now the only thing open is that hot dog stand, which everybody else is lining up to because the flight is delayed, and you don't do so. You'd rather go hungry. Why? In other words, without necessarily even realizing it, our lives are governed daily by accepting something that we otherwise typically don't get. It makes no sense. And hence, that was the most appropriate mitzvah to include the remaining 2 sons of Aaron within. Because life is full of experiences, as they came to learn in their own tragic way, where we just sometimes have to learn to accept the unacceptable. Does that mean that we cannot challenge? Does that mean that we cannot ask? Most certainly not. Elie Wiesel himself, who endured the depths of hell in Auschwitz, famously said, you can either love God or you can even hate God. You just simply can't ignore God. By definition, if you are able to love God, if you accept irrespective, then all the power to you. If you get angry with God and you want to challenge him, he gets it. Like any parent, he'll understand. And that's okay because the passion is there, even if in the anger, and that can later be transformed back into something more positive. Only, of course, as he argues, you just simply can't ignore God. You have to accept the reality. And it's only when you accept the fact that things happen for a reason that you could start to entertain the question of why. And that, in and of itself, is what preserves anyone's sanity in the face of whatever adversity, and enables one to accept the unacceptable, even as invariable questions will be rightfully asked and will linger eternal. There was once a farmer who owned a horse, and one day the horse ran away, and the people said, well, we're sorry this happened to you. He said, I don't know, maybe it's a bad thing, maybe it's a good thing. And a little while later, the horse came back with a bunch of wild horses in tow, and people congratulated him on his newfound wealth. And he said, I don't know, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. And a little while later, his son, when riding out on one of those wild horses, fell off and broke his leg. The people came along and said, we're sorry. He said, I don't know, maybe it's a bad thing, maybe it's a good thing. And then the king decided, as war broke out, to conscript every able-bodied young man into the military, only his son couldn't go because he had a broken leg. And the farmer said, now I know when my horse ran away that it was a good thing. And the point is simply this. Life is a series of events. And until the end of the series, it's hard to know why exactly things happen. Sometimes you'll see it here. Other times, in fact, most often, you will not see it until the hereafter. If in the process you can still love God, then hey, all the power to you. If you get angry with God, he understands, but you can't ignore God, because as in the words of the great Kotzker Rebbe, a God I can understand is a God not worth believing in. Abraham, our forefather, cried when his wife Sarah died. The Torah makes a deliberate point of recounting this. It is the first example of an outpouring of emotion in the Torah when it says, Lispod l'Sarah, to eulogize over Sarah v'livkota, and to cry over her. I mean, my goodness, this is Abraham. This is our forefather who was willing to sacrifice his own son. Superman, super faithful. Why can't he just so readily accept? That's the reality of life. She's now 127 years old. She died. Why is he crying? Because part and parcel of God's perfection is the fact that he is a compassionate God. Abraham ultimately is a human being, and God himself, who created man limited to the confines of time and space, knows and appreciates that man has limited understanding, and it doesn't look to deny us our natural instinct. This was the love of his life. Of course he cries, regardless of his actual faith. God expects us to express our emotions. He knows that inasmuch as we are intellectual beings, we are, after all, also emotional, sensitive beings. He didn't just give us brains, he did give us hearts, and to stymie that would be inhumane. But here's the catch. Even as Abraham cries, the Torah tells us, the word vilifkosa, and to cry over her, is spelled with a deliberate small cuff, smaller than the other letters of the word, to demonstrate that it was a natural grief, but it was also a controlled grief. It was a deep upset, but it wasn't despair. It was Abraham being a human being, but with a touch of divinity. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm pained that this happened. I also know that ultimately there's a reason beyond my understanding for this to have happened. And so in time, I will always learn to accept the unacceptable. In the famous story of Jacob's struggle with the angel, as the tussle ends, Jacob prevails and he is blessed by the angel. And then something unusual happens. Jacob turns to the angel and says, tell me, what is your name? And what does the angel do? Like any good Jew, he answers the question with a question. Why do you ask my name? And then they part ways. He blesses Jacob and they part ways. Why is Jacob concerned with the name of the angel? And why does the angel refuse to respond directly to his question? Some suggest because the angel is not refusing to identify himself, he simply can't. His identity changes with whatever particular role and challenge in which he might find himself. Now he's in this role, later he'll be in a different role. But why doesn't the angel at least explain that to Jacob rather than responding in the way that he does? And the point is that Jacob is realizing that he's facing a scenario over here which he knows will repeat itself time and again throughout the course of history. He's coming face to face with this angel whom we are told is the representative angel of Esau, about whom the Talmud declares it is established fact that Esau will always hate Jacob. Jacob knows that just as he's being obstructed by this angel, by this evil force right now, who's looking to obliterate him, so his eventual offspring are also going to face similar struggles throughout much of their existence. This angel will manifest itself in the guise of the Greeks, of the Romans, of the Germans, of Islamic fundamentalism. Jacob also knows that with the right sort of resolve and determination, one can overcome the oppression just as he was victorious over the angel. With fortitude and faith, all obstacles can be overcome. Good will ultimately prevail over evil. But what he can't understand, however, is why is it necessary? Why is the fate of the Jewish people such that we have to endure this unrelenting challenge of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic persecution? Why must it be the case that in every generation they will rise up against us to annihilate us? Why will the Jew always wander and constantly find himself as a stranger in a land that is not his or hers? And Jacob therefore asked the angel, what is your name? A name reflects the identity of a person, the essence of the person. And by asking this question, he wants to get to better grips, to a deeper understanding of what this is really all about. But the angel replies, why do you ask my name? And in so responding, he's communicating an insightful message. He's telling Jacob that there will always be certain questions that are beyond human grasp. Why do you ask my name? As great as you might be, try as you may, you will never be able to properly fathom the underlying reason for everything as it transpires. You'll be compelled to accept the unacceptable. There was a young boy whose father decided to spend some quality time with him together, and they're out on a fishing expedition. And after a while, the boy looks up to his father, and he says, Dad, how do boats float? And Dad says, I don't really know, son. And after a little while, the boy is looking into the water. He says, wow, Dad, how do fish breathe underwater? And he says, I don't really know, son. And after a little while, he's looking up. He says, wow, it's a beautiful day, Dad. How come skies are blue? And he says, I don't really know, son. His son senses that his father's getting uncomfortable. He says, Dad, I hope you don't mind me asking all these questions. And the father replies, of course not, son. If you don't ask, you're never going to learn anything. Life is complex. A multitude of questions continuously gnaw at us. Sometimes we're perturbed by the ostensibly prohibitive demands of our faith. Other times we simply cannot comprehend the perplexity of our universe and our roles within. For many, the outstanding question could be used as the excuse to abandon the premise, the faith. For others, the notion of asking borders on heresy. Jacob teaches us, on the one hand, the importance of asking, challenging, what is your name? Because if you don't ask, you're never going to learn anything. As in the words of our sages, the bashful will never learn. When going in search for medical treatment, you're going to typically ask questions, and you're going to want to seek out the best credentials of the best doctor in order to find the best possible care. And so too, in life's bigger picture, we're very much entitled to ask, to seek whatever answers in order to lead to a more meaningful existence. However, as we said earlier on in regard to mitzvot and whatever else besides, as the angel responds to Jacob, not everything was given to understand. Where we can explore and we can discover, we can delight and enjoy the discovery. But there will be times, in fact most often, when, why do you ask my name? We have to accept the reality for what it is. You know, we actually say this every evening in our prayer service. We will discuss your statutes and we will rejoice in the words of your Torah. When it comes to the statutes, when it comes to the supra-rational, we don't really have that deeper sense of satisfaction because we don't really understand. So all we can do is nasiach, we can only but talk about them. But v'nismach b'divrei saroscha, those things that we are able to understand, those things that are given to understand, that we can have that more internal sense of satisfaction, that we can properly rejoice in. We cannot rejoice, however, in the frustration of the unanswerable, but we accept nonetheless. Or as we say elsewhere in our prayer service, taken from the Psalms' famous song, when we discuss about God's kindness. Lahagid baboker chastecha. In the morning we talk about your kindness and your benevolence. Ve'emunoscha baleilos, and your faithfulness at night. In the mornings, when life is bright, when we see the bigger picture, when we get it, then we can talk about baboker chastecha. We see the kindness, we see the benevolence, we get it. Ve'emunoscha baleilos. But in the night, in the darker moments, during the struggles, then we have to resort to faithfulness. Then we just simply have to find within ourselves the strength to be able to accept what we might otherwise deem as being the unacceptable. So, in the final analysis, to doubt is a rational response, although clouded with emotion. To have faith is a supra-rational response, though entrenched in the spirit of intellectual honesty. And whilst it's true that faith always runs the risk of shrinking when washed in the waters of affliction, it's not a pill you take when in pain, but it's innate, it's intrinsic, it's a muscle you use in order to enable you to rise to the challenges of life. Indeed, the angel had already blessed Jacob earlier on, but the Torah tells by calling him from Yaakov, Israel. But at this point, right after it says, why do you ask my name? It repeats again, saying the angel blessed him over there. Because when we're able to get to grips with life by going in search of greater meaning, yes, relishing in the explanations that are available and accepting that some answers may never be forthcoming, when we have that balance, then we will indeed feel truly blessed. Let me conclude with reminding you of one experience that every single one of us will have been through. When a mother takes her young child to the doctor, the mother is wrestling the child and holds him down, kicking and screaming. The doctor administers a needle. We've all been through the experience. The child hates the doctor and hates his mother as an accessory to the actual crime. But when that child is so much older, what happens? Sometimes he will come back to that doctor begging him to give him an injection. What changed? Same doctor, same needle. The child changed. His perspective has changed. There's a new kind of maturity. And with maturity comes a different perspective. And then consider this. Even at that infantile stage, that same mother who held that child down and served as an accomplice to the crime of this injection is the same mother whom the child grabs hold of after the event for consolation and comfort, because somewhere deep down, even if only in the subconscious, a child knows this is part of a process and mom still loves me. Friends, one life is all we have, and we live it, and we should continue to always ensure that we live it in the way that we believe in living it. But just know, whether we get it or not, God, our supernal parent, loves us. Whether we observe or not, God, our supernal parent, loves us. A healthy parent can never stop loving a child. The umbilical cord is always connected. We just need, as in the words of the famous Serenity Prayer, to accept the things that we cannot change. We need the courage to change the things that we can, and above all else, the wisdom to know the difference between the two. May we all be blessed in finding that balance in our lives and thus leading more fulfilling and tranquil existence. Thank you.